Can you all hear me okay this morning?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good, because the mic was being finicky, so we're gonna do without. Project. And Merry Christmas. Here we are again, another year gone by. Lots to celebrate, maybe some things to mourn over the course of the past year. I wonder where this Christmas finds you, in terms of not just your place in life, but the memories that you're thinking of, the times that you may be looking back on, and the times that you were looking forward to. Tough times lived through, great celebrations experienced. Life changes, doesn't it? Even for the youngest of us, life changes. Maybe the excitement that you used to feel when you were little is a little bit less, but maybe you're looking for different things. It's not, it's still the same? That's awesome. Good, good.
Still the first one up.
Still the first one up. Wow, all right. One time a year. Exciting.
Once a year, Pastor.
What's that? 6 o'clock. Sometimes it's good that things change. I don't get awakened at 6 o'clock anymore. So we come to this place, right? And don't tell anybody else this, but of the services we celebrate around Christmas, this is my favorite. It's my favorite because it's the day. I mean, I love Christmas Eve, don't get me wrong, but to pick one that's favorite, this is it. Well, for a couple of reasons. Because it's a little bit quieter, because we get to celebrate communion together that we don't get to do at the other services. But I think mostly this is my favorite because of John's gospel. Because I love those words at the beginning of John, where he writes about the very beginning. Here's John, right? We know that John is a man of deep, deep faith. And he decides that he's going to set down what he has learned, what he has experienced, what really empowers him. He's going to write that down. And hopefully as he writes this down, it's not just for information, but it's for transformation. How will the things that John says in his gospel catch the hearts and minds of God's people and transform them so that they have a better understanding of who they are and of God's relationship to them? And if you've ever written somebody a letter or even set about to write a story yourself, you know that if you don't catch people right at the beginning, you'll lose them. So John, reflecting on God's presence in the world and his own experience of that presence, has to think very carefully and pray very deeply about what is it that he's going to say that's going to grab people's attention and that's going to start out positively and in an affirming way right off so that people are attentive to the word that he has to share. So John, being a good Jew, remembers the best story he ever heard, in the beginning. In the beginning. And he says, that's it. In the beginning was the Word. Now many people since John, in the 2,000 years intervening, have pondered the beginning of John's Gospel and thought, there are other ways to start that. Why the Word? Why not the act? Why not something more powerful than just the Word? But John knew how powerful words are, how formative they are. And maybe, as you heard that reading from John, that for some of you may be unfamiliar, for some of you very familiar, maybe as you heard these opening verses from John's Gospel, there were phrases that kind of caught your imagination. Phrases that made you think, or made you feel comforted, or made you feel energized, or reminded you about what today really, really means. What this is about. Why we gather. In the beginning, John says, was the Word. And that Word was life. How positive John is, how affirming he is about what God is up to in the world. In the beginning was the Word. And unlike so much of the communication that we hear these days, it was not a word of condemnation, not a word of judgment, not a word of criticism, not a word trying to get us to do something or accomplish something or to reform ourselves. It was a word of identification. It was a word that reminds us of who we are because of who God is. It is a word that grounds us and centers us and roots us in this very positive affirmation, as we heard in other places in our readings, that God is consistent, that God is God, and that will never change. But in light of that reality, who are we? And what is that relationship? It's kind of funny around Christmas, with our Christmas carols and the lessons that we read and the things that we do together. It seems to me that we read more about heaven around Christmas than at any other time during the year. You know, angels we have heard on high, and the angels visiting the shepherds, and Gabriel actually coming down and spending time with Mary, and angels visiting Joseph. And there seems to be almost like the door between heaven and earth has been opened, and there's lots of traffic going back and forth. Lots of angels coming down and people receiving messages from God more than at any other time in our history as people, more than at any other time in Scripture. The angels are working overtime. I mentioned that Sunday morning that Gabriel was visiting all these folks, and I said, Gabriel was working overtime, and one of the young boys in our congregation, whose name is Gabriel, said, I am? But there's this exchange that happens, this openness that happens around Christmas that reminds us that those two worlds, the one in which we live and heaven, are really not that separate at all, because God is the God of both of them, and God gathers both of them up, and that there's a connecting point between heaven and earth, powerfully witnessed in the birth of Jesus that we celebrate today, where there is no separation, where God isn't just the God of heaven, but God is the God lying in a manger. God is the God who becomes incarnate in a body just like ours, to remind us that God walks with us. That the separation between heaven and earth is no separation at all. So I wonder what phrases in John's Gospel you heard this morning that kind of caught your imagination or brought you a sense of hope and joy and strength on this Christmas day. Many of them, we have all received grace upon grace. What a great phrase. Isn't that a great phrase? Grace upon grace. God's lavish love and abundant care for us. Grace upon grace. The light shines in the darkness. Here are good words for today. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it, despite what we sometimes think and feel and experience. John's strong affirmation that the birth of this baby is the birth of God's light into the world once again, as at the beginning, God said, let there be light. That light shines in the darkness, John says, and the darkness has not overcome it. Not in the world, not in your life, not in God's time. The light still shines, sometimes faint, sometimes dim, but I wonder sometimes when I experience that darkness, if it's not because my vision is clouded, right? It's not God not shining light, it's me losing the ability to see it because I get so overwhelmed with things that seem to be squashing out human life. And yet John's affirmation, which is one we hold on to, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So many great, poetic, beautiful phrases in there that remind us of God's care. But this one this year struck me the most. And I hope you'll take the bulletin home with you and maybe have conversation about that. What is it that struck you in John's Gospel reading for this morning? Think about that a little bit more. Ponder these things. Keep them in your heart. But I just want to share with you the one that really struck me this year. And that was the very last verse that we read together from John's Gospel. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, who has made him known. You wonder what God is up to? John says, look to Jesus. You wonder how God feels about God's people? Look to Jesus. Look to that life of grace and self-giving and self-sacrifice, because God is light and love. And for some reason, while I was thinking about this, John 14 came into mind. John 14 is a very common reading for funerals, and I'll share that reading with you. John 14, 1-6. Just before Jesus' death by crucifixion, he's with his disciples, and he's talking to them about the future, about which they are understandably anxious. And he says, do not let your hearts be troubled. do not let them be afraid. He says, in my Father's house there are many mansions. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go and prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, so that where I am, you may be also. Now, I think we get a little tripped up there, at least I do, and we get tripped up there a little bit because of all the jokes that have succeeded from these verses, right? About houses and mansions and what's yours going to look like and what's it going to be like when we get up there and there's all these beautiful places for us to live, and we think about having our own place up there and having how cool will that be, because that's what Jesus promised us in the King James Version, many mansions, so everybody gets a mansion. In the newer versions, it's not as exotic, right? It's a dwelling place, which could be anything, right? You can get a tiny house. Maybe we have tiny houses up there. But as I put John 14 together with John 1, something new occurred to me. When Jesus says, I will go and prepare a place for you, so that where I am, I may come again and take you, so that you may be where I am, maybe that place that Jesus was talking about is the one referenced here in John 1, the Father's heart. Could that be the promise of Christmas? That since Jesus is close to the Father's heart, that he comes to bring us to be in that place, which is better than any mansion, any dwelling place, that what the incarnation means, what we celebrate, is that we have a place close to the Father's heart. That you have that place. And wouldn't it be great if we woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning on Christmas, and the gift we were looking for and celebrating was the reality that is already ours, that we have a place close to the Father's heart, because we do. To be awakened in the morning, every morning, to remember that reality of our lives. And because of that reality, for ourselves and for our loved ones and for this entire world, because of that reality, then we know what it means when John says the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Never can, and never will, because of our place close to the Father's heart. So my prayer for you today is that those words of John will find a new resting place in your heart, that you will be reminded of your place that Jesus prepares and maintains for you, close to the Father's heart. And that because of this, you will share that love and that good news and that peace with other people, and that you may be surrounded with people, that you're close to their hearts and they to yours, and that you will remember together, you are all, every one of us, gathered close to the Father's heart.